Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy, produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Alistair Taylor, MEI's editor-in-chief. Matthew Chekai is out this week. On today's program, we'll be discussing U.S. President Donald Trump's upcoming visit to the Gulf region, the first foreign trip of his second term. From May 13th through 16th, the president will be visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. All three countries are key U.S. partners in the Middle East, leading international economic actors, and increasingly important players in mediation and diplomacy, both in the region and around the world. What's on the agenda for Trump's visit? What will both sides be looking to get out of the trip? And how might it affect some of the key issues and developments in the region, including the U.S.-Iran talks, the once again escalating war in Gaza, and the massive challenge of reconstruction and recovery in Syria? To discuss all of these issues and more, I'm joined today by Dr. Ibrahim al-Assil, Senior Fellow at MEI and a Professorial Lecturer at George Washington University. As always, our listeners can subscribe to Middle East Focus on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast providers. And please do check out MEI's other podcasts as well, Rethinking Democracy with Gunul Toll and Taking the Edge Off the Middle East with Brian Katulis. Ibrahim, welcome to the program, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Alistair. It's great to be with you.
So, Ibrahim, let's start off with the basics here. What do we know about the details of the trip?
Sure. So if you remember in 2017, we had a similar trip. It was the first trip for President Trump in his first term outside the United States, and it was to the region. This time, it's a similar trip in a way that it's loaded with symbolism and signaling. It will start in Saudi Arabia on May 13th. On May 14th, there will be a summit, a GCC summit. On May 15th, he's going to head to Qatar. And then finally, on May 16th, he will be in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates.
Why these three countries and why now? What's the kind of the timing piece here?
That's a great question. I think for Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar, this trip is as important as it is for the American president, Donald Trump. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, they are the pillars of the U.S. presence and influence in the Gulf as a sub-region of the Middle East. Saudi is strengthening its image as the lead of the Arab regional order, and I think that's one of the reasons why they want to host the GCC summit. For the UAE, the country has become a hub for tech and defense cooperation. And for Qatar, their role in mediation has deepened over the last few years, as much as their ties as well with the United States. So for each of these countries, they want to focus on these points. They want to show that they have strong personal relationship with President Trump to highlight their distinct value to Washington, D.C. And of course, for President Trump, he wants to cultivate all of that and strengthening the economic ties and show that he is a global player and a deal maker the way he likes to promote himself.
How significant do you think it is that Trump isn't going to Israel on this trip?
I think it's quite significant because in the trip of 2017, the next stop after Saudi Arabia was Israel. This time, President Trump is skipping a stop in Israel, and that probably suggests one or two things. First, it shows that there is no expected diplomatic breakthrough that's ready to announce from Gaza, like a ceasefire or hostage release or normalization. President Trump likes with these visits to have very strong and powerful announcements. Second, President Trump wants to focus on wins. He wants this trip to be on the economic and strategic side, on cooperation with Gulf countries without being pulled into ongoing conflicts like the one between Israel and Gaza. It also shows that the current American administration prioritizes bilateral Gulf ties and economic diplomacy over broader regional issues and conflict resolution approach.
You touched on this a little bit, but what are the kind of key items on the agenda? What are the U.S. and the three Gulf states looking to get out of the trip, broadly speaking?
So I think each side wants something tangible. President Trump wants big investments He wants investment pledges to boost his economic credentials, to reinforce his ties with these key allies. When it comes to the Gulf states, we're talking about defense assurances, tech access, and clear signals of U.S. support. Saudi Arabia, in particular, wants recognition for its role as a leader in the region. The UAE wants to ease chip restrictions on sales to the UAE to advance its tech diplomacy. And finally, for Qatar, they want to boost their deals with the United States. Specifically, we're talking about Boeing deal. And also, they want to increase their image as a diplomatic partner for the United States.
It's also significant what isn't likely to be on the agenda as well, with Saudi Arabia indicating, according to press reports, that talk of normalization of relations with Israel would not be part of the discussions.
Right. And I think that's mainly related to the issue that they want to avoid any point that has lots of uncertainty. They don't want to be seen that they are arguing about one point. They don't want to discuss something that won't lead to a tangible outcome. That's why both sides clearly want to just focus on things that at the end of the day or at the end of the visit, they can say we reached this or that and we concluded this deal and we signed this agreement.
Given the administration's emphasis on a bilateral approach to relations with the Gulf states, as you touched on earlier, how does the Gulf Cooperation Council summit fit into things?
I would say it's more symbolic than structural or something that could come with actionable items at the end. It gives the appearance of regional consensus in the Gulf under the leadership of Riyadh and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which is significant for him and for the country, for the kingdom. And also because at the same time, it's important to highlight that President Trump leans more into bilateralism over multilateralism. And that's why I don't think the summit itself will lead to certain decisions. It offers him a stage to engage with all these 6 countries, members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, without being pulled into complexity or uncontrolled discussions. So it's a good image with low risk.
This trip comes at a time when the region is dealing with a number of other major issues as well. As I mentioned briefly at the top, the U.S. and Iran are engaging in diplomatic talks aimed at reaching an agreement on Tehran's nuclear program. The dire situation in Gaza looks set to get even worse as Israel vows to ramp up its military campaign. Lebanon and Syria, of course, are dealing with the massive challenges of reconstruction and recovery. How is all of that likely to factor into the discussions, and what are the kind of key regional and strategic calculations at play here?
I think all these issues will be in the background of all the meetings with the President Trump. We probably won't see them front and center, but they will be in the background. I expect the Gulf leaders to continue to press towards negotiations with Iran. At the same time, also, they will press to continue the deterrence for Iran. They don't want another escalation. Their memory is still fresh of when they were attacked by Iran and by Iranian-backed militias, both the UAE and Saudi Arabia and their oil fields, and they don't want to see that happening again. On Gaza, I expect to have pressure, private, of course, pressure on President Trump to facilitate humanitarian aid and de-escalation in Gaza, but probably they won't discuss strategic resolution for the conflict. For Syria, the Gulf states and specifically Saudi Arabia has been trying to move forward on aid, on helping Syria recover, and on supporting the new Syrian administration and Ahmed al-Shara, the new Syrian president. But the US sanctions have been a major obstacle and a major roadblock for these efforts. So I expect them to continue to pressure President Trump on that. We know the Saudis, they've been doing that actively in the region and in the United States as well, to push the administration to be more open towards the Syrian administration, because they want to stabilize the region. That's something all Gulf countries agree on this point, that stability should be the priority in the region. Specifically for Saudi Arabia, it's aligned with Vision 2030, with the vision of depending on economy and growth and development in stabilizing the region. And I expect that, or their effort when it comes to Syria also to fall, or Lebanon to fall within that framework and that vision.
Shifting gears to the sort of business at the core of this trip, in the run-up, there's been a lot of talk about the potential for major economic deals, new investment pledges from the Gulf states. Some big figures for both Saudi and the UAE have been thrown around earlier this year. What are your kind of expectations on that front?
Large deals, I would say. That's my expectations. And I think that's what President Trump wants to hear. That's what he wants to say. That's what the Gulf countries want to highlight, to show the strong partnership between them and the current administration. If we look at each of those countries, for Qatar, there have been discussions on a deal for Qatar Airways to buy Boeing wide-body jets. We're talking about 100 that actually might go up to 200 in the negotiations or so. The UAE has already pledged $1.4 trillion in investments over the next decade, over the next 10 years. Saudi Arabia, there have been discussions about a total number of investments, 600 billions. We know that President Trump will try to push that to 1 trillion of investments. And all these deals, of course, they are also political signals. They are as much important politically as much as they are important economically, and they will give the Gulf states leverage and they will show their strong relationships with President Trump.
Indeed, just looking at it from the U.S. side, 3 months into Trump's second term, the economic news here in the U.S. has been a bit, shall we say, mixed. One could imagine that Trump is looking for some wins to kind of change the narrative around the tariff war, the sort of economic upheaval, the stock market upheaval. What do you see as the kind of key domestic considerations on the U.S. side there?
The domestic consideration is significant in all of this. After the tariff war or the tariff increase and announcement, there is a huge uncertainty in the financial markets in the United States and outside the United States. These investment pledges we just discussed from Saudi, from the UAE, and from Qatar certainly helps President Trump to show momentum, to give more hope about job creation. And also, I would say it helps him show some global confidence in his economic leadership that's been in question over the last few weeks. It will also, for him personally, help him reinforce his image as a deal maker, as a negotiator, as somebody who can bring deals home and help Americans and those who are seeking jobs. That's why I think it's very significant for him and his administration, and there will be so much focus by their press on this trip, on these agreements, and to highlight all these huge numbers and huge deals that will be announced on this visit.
You touched on some of the top line figures for the UAE, for Saudi, and of course the Qatar Airways potential deal. What other sectors do you think we're likely to see deals in?
Defense and aviation, as you just mentioned, energy, infrastructure, and AI. Boeing and General Electrics, we heard a lot about these deals, especially for Qatar, but also the UAE. By the way, Emirates Airlines, they are the largest buyers of Boeing in the world. Also, both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they are looking to semiconductors deals and cooperation on AI, and specifically, of course, Abu Dhabi. For Saudi Arabia, we talked about that 1 point, probably it will exceed the trillion, 3 trillion total, all of that. And to connect it, Alistair, to your previous question about the domestic dimension, it's also important to highlight that China stopped buying Boeing aircraft. And that's why these deals are very important from Qatar and probably from Emirates Airlines. However, I wonder if Emirates will announce any new deals on this trip, because usually they announce these deals in Dubai Air Show, which happens every 2 years in November. The last one happened in 2023. There will be one in November this year. That's usually when they announce their deals. But who knows? There might be some announcements on that sector on this trip.
Well, with Trump, you can always expect the unexpected, I think.
Right.
It's fair to say. We would also be remiss, of course, if we didn't note that Trump's sons have been doing a tremendous amount of deal-making across the region in the run-up to the trip as well. That's obviously not something that's, shall we say, officially part of the agenda, but it's certainly part of the broader picture. How is that part of things being portrayed or perceived in the region?
Yeah, this is probably the most controversial issue from the American side. From the region, it's been seen positively. A few days ago, I think on May 1st or 2nd, Eric Trump was on a panel in Dubai, and they talked about crypto and the crypto ventures and the new also investments from United Arab Emirates in this venture that's branded by the Trump family. However, that also might at some point backfire because of the domestic dimension we're talking about in the United States and the conflicts of interest. So while it's a huge investment, it's definitely seen positively from the region and from President Trump and his circles. However, we don't know in which direction that would go, because it's blurring the line between diplomacy and private gain for President Trump and his circle, and that might raise concerns domestically in the United States in the near term and the long term.
We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to drill down in a little bit more detail on the issue of AI and tech, since it's such an important part of this visit. Both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi have placed a huge amount of importance on those areas, on AI and tech development as part of their long-term economic and diversification plans. AI was a central item on the agenda during Sheikh Tahnoon's recent visit here in D.C. What are the UAE and Saudi looking to achieve specifically from this trip? What sort of changes or concessions do they want from Washington?
Yeah, the trip you just mentioned for Sheikh Tahnoon, and also it was AI and tech partnership was mainly, or the main items on the agenda also for the visit of the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed in September of last year. So they've been consistent on this issue. The UAE wants access to advanced AI chips. Specifically, we're talking about the chips from the company NVIDIA. They want to reduce, or they want lower restrictions on their ability to buy these chips. President Trump reportedly asked a few weeks ago why countries like the United Arab Emirates cannot get AI chips while they are approved to buy fighter jets F-35. Well, that's not very accurate, because that deal didn't go through, but it shows that President Trump is open to this idea and he wants to push in that direction. And Abu Dhabi wants this issue for AI because they are trying to become a regional technological hub, but also because it shows a bilateral framework between Abu Dhabi and Washington, D.C. It shows Abu Dhabi as a trusted tech partner. And that's also important for them and for their long-term plan and the image they are building. But of course, we have the China limitations on all of that. The United Arab Emirates has tried to, or they've cut part of their ties with Huawei, the Chinese company, but China remains a major issue in all of this.
Just to build on that last point, how do you see the kind of the China factor coming into to play here? Obviously, they've taken steps to limit the partnerships with Chinese companies, the use of Chinese tech, but it is a kind of broader ongoing issue.
When we talked about the regional issues, and I said that they will be always in the background, I think same with China. I think it's on President Trump's mind. It's strategic issue for the United States, and it's certainly part of all of these, or at least the motivation and the desired outcome of these talks. The UAE is trying to reassure Washington, D.C. on this front by divesting from some of their relationships with technology firms, Chinese technology firms, and they are promising more transparency on their relationship with China. However, of course, skepticism remains, especially that this issue is not only about the administration, it's also about the Congress, and the United Arab Emirates needs to work on all these dimensions at once to be able to gain or improve the trust between them and the American side. I expect President Trump to be more flexible, but that tension won't disappear. That security tension, it will improve. It's on that direction, but it still has many obstacles.
They've got something of a kind of tricky balancing act, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, when it comes to dealing with this issue, because obviously the U.S. is pushing for them to kind of align more closely with Washington, but at the same time, their economic ties are increasingly with China, and there are, understandable concerns over U.S. unpredictability. So it's a tough balancing act, I think, for them to strike.
They will hedge. They will continue the hedge. That's what they've been doing. That's what they will continue to do, no matter what kind of deals they strike. They want alignment. They want to signal alignment with the United States on the security and tech realms, but they also want to keep the door open for economic cooperation with China. They don't want to be pushed into binary choices with us or against us. That's very important for the Gulf and for their strategic approach.
Security cooperation and weapons sales have long been a key facet of the U.S. Gulf relationship and are likely to come into play here too. Just days ago, we saw the State Department approve a $3.5 billion sale of missiles and parts to Saudi Arabia. What else do you expect to see on that front during the trip?
Yes, we have the missile deal, and that will take, of course, the headlines. That also includes F-15 EX fighters, advanced medium range air-to-air missiles, and also to expand the logistical support offered from the United States to Saudi Arabia. Also, I expect that the visit includes long-term defense agreements, MOUs, maybe some discussions on co-production projects, but probably they won't be also finalized. Like, we're going to hear some announcements, but probably won't be finalized deals, and they might not even be binding, many of them. But specifically for this issue, for the defense agreement, the Middle East, more than 50% of the deals for arms sales in the Middle East been with the United States over the last few years. So this is very important for both the Gulf countries and the United States.
And indeed, and during Trump's last visit in 2017, there was quite a high dollar value, I think a $350 billion arms deal in Saudi that was signed. So certainly precedents to go by there. Wanted to turn now to the issue of energy and OPEC dynamics, which is kind of a tricky issue for the two sides. There are tensions around oil prices in particular. Trump wants lower prices to kind of soften the impact from inflation, from tariffs. Saudi Arabia especially will want higher prices given the kind of huge costs associated with Vision 2030 projects. OPEC Plus also just recently pushed ahead with unwinding some of its previous cuts, which is boosting production. There's a kind of Several complicated variables there. How do you see the issues around energy playing out? And do you think there's room for a compromise or an understanding between the two sides?
Yeah, as you mentioned, OPEC Plus just increased the production with more than 400,000 barrels per day that will start next month. And that immediately lowered the oil prices by 4%, and that might increase in the future. And I think that partly happened, like in part only to curry favor with President Trump. But also, I think there are other parts or other issues that play a role, and they are part of the Saudi calculations, because it also allows them to gain a bigger share of the market. And also it's an intimidating step for smaller producers in Central Asia who haven't been following the rules, or they've been exceeding their quota. So that also helps Saudi from that side. However, I would highlight that while we are seeing an alignment at this point between Saudi Arabia and the United States, between Saudi Arabia and President Trump, there is still structural divergence here, because Saudi Arabia lowered the price now, but they do need higher prices in the future for their Vision 2030, for diversification, while President Trump wants to keep the prices down to control inflation, as you mentioned, and other reasons. So now they are aligning, but I don't think that will remain the case for a long time.
We touched on some of the broader regional issues that are going to be in the background, you said, as you put it, throughout these meetings a little bit earlier, but I wanted to kind of circle back to them to drill down in a little bit more detail, starting with the issue of Iran. Obviously, the U.S. is engaged in talks with Iran, but should they go sideways, the Gulf states are very concerned about the potential blowback from a conflict, especially given all of their domestic economic plans. That's a big reason why they've pursued de-escalation with Tehran in recent years. How do they view the talks, and what are they likely to tell their American counterparts during their meetings?
I see that at this point, the Gulf countries, they want a balance. They want to support diplomacy, but they want guarantees. They want to be open to the talks with Iran, but they want to maintain deterrence. They don't want things to spiral out of control. They don't want a repeat of 2019, when Iran struck the oil fields and infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, and there was virtually, no consequences for Iran on that front. So they don't want to see that movie being played again. They want probably to encourage President Trump to continue the talks, but at the same time to develop plan B for what might happen in the future. And also, they're not only concerned about the nuclear issue, they're also concerned about the Iranian proxies. And that takes me back to the issue on Syria, because the Gulf, part of why Saudi Arabia is pushing the United States to ease some of the sanctions on Syria, because they are worried this current trajectory might make an opening for Iran to go back to Syria. If there is a collapse, if there is a fragmentation, if there is a confrontation between Israel and Turkey in Syria, Iran will find a way to go back and support proxies inside Syria. And that's certainly a concern for the Gulf countries. And on top of them is Saudi Arabia.
Just on the Syria piece, do you think the Gulf states will try to convince the Trump administration to take a different approach there's the concern over the potential for Iranian influence, but also the sanctions. And then now Washington seems to be scaling back its military presence as well. What do you think the Gulf states will try to bend Trump's ear about on Syria?
Yes, absolutely. I expect them to push in that direction, to lift some sanctions, or at least to allow them to deliver aid, to help the Syrian economy, to help the new government be on its feet in Damascus, and to help the government in Damascus to consolidate power in Syria. The major strategic approach of the Gulf countries at this point in the region is to stabilize, is to strengthen central states. They want stability, They want government partners. They don't want to support non-state actors, and they really fear a collapse in Syria and a renewed cycle of conflict. That's, I think, what they will be highlighting to President Trump, and they will probably ask him also to try to limit the Israeli actions inside Syria, fearing that escalation, fearing the fragmentation, and fearing a renewed cycle of violence inside Syria.
There's been a lot of rumors that we might see a meeting between Trump and Syrian President Mohammed al-Shara in Saudi Arabia, potentially during that kind of regional summit day. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard the latest there?
I've heard the rumors. I don't know if they are just rumors or something more. If it happens, it will be huge. But I also know there are many figures inside the Trump administration, inside the White House, who strongly oppose this. So if it happens, it will be a major shock, and it will be a game changer for al-Shara and for Damascus. But so far, I haven't seen serious signals about that yet.
Finally, I want to touch on Gaza. The situation there, which was already dire, has become truly catastrophic amid the ongoing total blockade of the Strip by Israel and its pledge of a new, quote, intensive escalation in the coming days. What do you think the Gulf states are going to try to do there? Do you think they'll try to get the Trump team to kind of rein in the Israelis a bit, or help facilitate a ceasefire deal, or at least greater provision of humanitarian aid?
They would love to see all of that, all these points you talked about, ceasefire, delivering aid, but I don't think they will confront President Trump publicly. They will talk about these issues behind the scenes. They will urge the United States to rein in Israel, and specifically to prevent a wider escalation and a wider humanitarian disaster, which is really concerning for the Gulf. I expect Qatar in particular probably to talk about ceasefire mediation, but they all will try to avoid any disagreements, specifically public ones. So they will talk about that, but it's not the major goal or the major item of the agenda on this visit. Economics are business deals, and all the other issues related to investments are the major items on the agenda.
We've covered a lot of ground in our conversation today, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to kind of get your concluding thoughts and ask you, what are the kind of key issues or areas that you'll be watching particularly closely next week to get a sense of how things are going?
I expect that we will hear a lot about so many deals. We will probably even hear some inflated promises and non-binding statements from all sides. All of them need some wins at this point. And this trip is about optics, is about leverage, is about strategic positioning. I'll be watching the size and the nature of the deals, specifically the ones in the tech realm, the investments beyond the headlines. What sectors? What do they mean? Is there anything about co-production when it comes to defense deals? I will also be watching if these will remain transactional in nature, or we will see something more long-term and strategic between these countries, because this will also give us a clearer sense about the framework or the big picture approach of President Trump to the Middle East over the next 4 years.
I think that's a great place to leave things, but thank you very much, Ibrahim, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you also to our listeners for tuning in, and to our production team for all of their work on this week's episode. You can find MEI's latest coverage of Trump's Gulf trip and other regional issues on our website at www.mei.edu. And you can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Alistair Taylor. We hope you'll listen in again next week.